to introduce to you Kathie Conn and Julie Molenaar to talk, first of all, just give us each a few words about yourself, who you are, where you're from, what gets you going in the morning or whatever. And then you're going to take us through some slides and a video clip, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers with a prompt finish at 8 o'clock for those who want to go. Okay, so Kathie, Julie, over to you.
Julie, do you want to go first? Introduce yourself, just a couple of words.
Why not? Hi everyone, I'm Julie. I'm quite a recent joinee to CORG, or Citizens Assembly Working Group within XR. Yeah, thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited to be here. This is my first time giving this talk, so this should be really good.
Great, lovely to have her with us. Hi, I'm Kathie, and I'm the external coordinator for XR's Citizens Assembly Working Group. And I'm now going to start sharing the screen. Let's hope all the technology goes fine. Okay. Whoops, not happening. Are we there? Can you see the slides? Yeah, great, sorry. It's sort of, okay. Yes. Let's do it big, here we go. So we call ourselves corgis for short, and the aim of the Citizens Assembly Working Group is to spread the word amongst people in XR and the greater public about why a citizens assembly is vital in ensuring we find fair solutions to the climate and ecological emergency that we are now facing, in fact. So this talk is designed to give you all the sufficient information to start up a conversation about citizens assemblies and help other people fall in love with what we like to call real democracy. And so we'd really love you to go out there and help spread the word about how we can deepen democracy. So over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to talk about Citizens Assembly, what they are, how they work, and why Extinction Rebellion is demanding one. And then we'll do a short question and answer. Does that sound good? Okay, let's go. So, I just recap, you might know, or you might not, Extinction Rebellion's 3 demands. The first is tell the truth. The second is act now, as if it's real. And the third is go beyond politics. And it really means go beyond party politics. And it's the third demand that we're going to focus on, because at the heart of it is the call for a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. And Extinction Rebellion is not trying to exert its will on anyone or claim that we have all the answers. We just want the UK public to have a say on how we should respond to the crisis. And we also believe that if we achieve the third demand, the first and the second fall in place, because the truth will be told and the government will have to act. So what is a citizens' assembly? It's a key mechanism of what's technically known as deliberative or participatory democracy. But as I said, we like to call it real democracy. So let's have a look we're going to have a little look at what that means in practice. Whoops, can I get this going? Sorry. Right, I'm just going to actually minimize you up here. So you may recognise the picture on the left. That was taken in the House of Commons, and it was during a net zero carbon emissions debate. And no, actually, they weren't socially distancing. This was well pre-COVID, in 2018, I think it was, and only 40 MPs out of 650 showed up for what was the first net zero carbon emissions debate in over 2 years. And it was following one of the record-breaking February temperatures. And this was the number who turned up: 40 out of 650. So that really indicates the level of awareness and concern amongst our elected politicians. The other thing to notice about the photograph is how they're sitting opposite each other, looking to score points and to win. It's a win-lose situation there. And that's the key factor in their inability to tackle the climate and ecological emergency. Whereas on the picture on the right is what we could have, a citizens' assembly, where all sorts of different people have come together to find solutions. And you notice how they're sitting around in groups, and it's a collaborative, not an oppositional approach. So to reiterate, the current system just cannot deal with the climate emergency, and let's have a little look a bit further about why not. So the standard election cycle runs every 5 years, and when we as voters elect one person to represent us on a range of very different sub-issues on which they're often not experts. The voting system is first past the post, not even proportional representation. So the landscape is dominated by just two parties, and many people are so disillusioned, they don't trust politicians and they don't bother to vote. Short-term decision-making, we've known about this emergency for over 50 years actually, and yet most politicians only see as far as their next election campaign. And so they don't want to do anything that actually might affect their re-election. And is not truly representative. The majority of politicians are from very similar privileged backgrounds and are often heavily invested in maintaining things as they are. Politicians have to follow party lines and are dependent on vested interests. So it's no secret that many politicians are influenced by agendas that can often be in conflict with the common good. Hence, there's a limited scope for radical ideas, and particularly on issues as far-reaching and as consequential as the climate emergency. So in short, our current political system does not support politicians to make the really difficult decisions that are going to need to be made, but more importantly, nor does it allow citizens a say in what sort of future they want. However, there is another approach, and that is a citizens' assembly, which has really good problem-solving capabilities. So you can see here a little bit of how it works. I'm going to take you through this. But before I go through, there are two requirements that need to be in place prior to the commencement of the Citizens' Assembly. First is a viable question needs to be formed that allows for real decision making by the Assembly members. Alternatively, the Assembly itself must have the power to frame the question. At the start, it must also be clear what the government will do with the Assembly recommendations. So let's have a look at how it works. There are sort of 6 basic stages. First is step 1 is sortition. And this is a process whereby members of the Assembly are selected randomly, similar to UK jury duty. And the aim of this is to create a diverse group of citizens, which broadly mirrors the age, the gender, the geographical, ethnic and class characteristics of the population as a whole. It's a cross-section of society, everyday people like you and me. And it works something like this. Letters are sent to, say, 3,000 people, as they were in the recent there was a Climate Assembly UK, 30,000, sorry, not 3. They were sent out across the UK, inviting them to indicate their willingness to be part of the Assembly. The positive responses are then sorted into categories, as I mentioned before: age, class, geography, ethnicity, and gender. And then it's from these category groups that Assembly members are again randomly selected. And what's really important to note is that Assembly members are paid and all their expenses covered. And this is to ensure that people of all backgrounds feel able to commit to taking part. Step 2 is learning. Firstly, the Assembly members receive training in critical thinking and hidden bias. Then they hear from a wide range of speakers, experts like scientists, economists, historians, and stakeholders such as power companies, activists, environmental organisations, and rights holders such as farmers, company workers, and affected ordinary people, members of the public. Members of the Assembly can ask questions and have things explained. An oversight body ensures that the presentations are fair, wide-ranging and balanced, and that the power of special interests is limited and transparent, declared. Step 3, submissions from the public. The broader public can feed in on topics or issues that they would like the Assembly to consider. Usually there's a mechanism, not always, but usually there's a mechanism whereby the issues or suggestions are presented to the Assembly for them to consider. Then a really important part, this is the sort of deliberative part, which is the talking with other people. So they break into small groups of no more than 8 to 12 people, and they discuss what they've heard and think about how it impacts them and their community. And they listen to each other, deliberate, and find common ground in the best interests of everyone. Each group has a trained facilitator who makes sure everyone's voice is heard and no one person dominates the discussion. Step 5, they draft and vote on recommendations. The Assembly then produces a report which includes reasons for backing the recommendations, as well as a summary of the different views that fed into the decisions. And step 6, the one we all hope, government implements the recommendations. So are XR setting a precedent by calling for a citizens' assembly UK-wide on the climate and ecological emergency? No, they're not. Not at all. We only need to look across the Irish Sea for an example of how citizens' assemblies are being used to enhance the democratic process. The Irish Citizens' Assembly was established by the Irish Parliament, and 99 citizens were selected, randomly selected to participate. And they actually deliberated on 5 issues over the course of 1.5 years. That is rather exceptional. The 2 most notable were gay marriage and abortion. On abortion in particularly, the Assembly broke political deadlock that had been present for years, helping to inform the public debate and the framing of the question that was put to a referendum. Interestingly, on the abortion issue, 64% of the Assembly members agreed on the recommendation put to the Irish government. And when it came to the referendum, which had to take place in order to bring about constitutional change, 66% of the electorate voted in favour. So it's a really good indication how the Assembly quite accurately reflected the sentiment of the country as a whole. Right, let's move over and hear what John Long has to say. John took part in this, the Irish Citizens' Assembly, and he said, there just seems to be a political disconnect all over the Western world. Citizens' assemblies are a new layer of democracy. We probably put a couple of 100 hours of total time into it. We're probably the best informed amateurs in the country on this topic at the moment. So the notion that MPs are more informed than the average person is not true. In some instances they may be, but generally they are presented with briefing notes shortly before a vote. And members of a citizens' assembly will arguably have had much more time than the average politician to gain knowledge, question experts, and deliberate with fellow citizens. And is Ireland the only country where this is happening? Not at all. Here you can see deliberative democratic events that are happening and have happened all over the world. They're not all citizens' assemblies, but they are deliberative democratic events. And for further information, if you go to participedia.net there, you can get all sorts of case studies, and it's a really good resource. Now, what I'm going to do, if everything goes well with my new share, I'm going to play a clip to you to give you a flavour of what can be achieved when people come together like this. It was filmed at an event called America in One Room. It isn't a citizens' assembly, but it is a deliberative poll, which I won't explain here, but it does give you an insight into the power of discussion and people coming together and collective intelligence. So let's have a look. Hopefully, sorry, is that working? Can you see the screen? Stefan, can you just...
Yeah, we can see the screen.
Perfect. Okay, off we go.
You need to go for it.
In the heart of Texas.
Last table on your left, they will check you in. A little bit more serious. That's beautiful. Yeah, there. That's great.
526 Americans gathering.
I love this. Great. Thank you so much.
Upset about the partisan divide.
Let's be real.
This is an experiment, a scientific sample, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, representing 47 states.
You are going to listen to other people whom you never ordinarily would encounter.
Reflecting who votes on Election Day.
Hey, how are you?
It's a 4-day in-person poll called America in One Room. Before arriving, this group took one poll on the major issues in the 2020 election. Here,
It's a great question.
they listened to candidates, to experts,
This is really your time to have your voice heard.
and break into randomly selected small groups to talk.
When's the last time you talked to a 70-year-old white Republican?
I don't think I've ever talked to a 70-year-old white Republican until now.
You know, we're being stormed at the southern border, and that's a problem that needs to be dealt with.
The illegal immigrants that we have today, you can see it all of the time, waving their country's flags, burning the American flag.
Sure, on TV you see the ones that do all this crazy stuff, but most of them work.
Like the country, this group is deeply divided about immigration.
I feel like you have a wall, a border wall, and along comes ICE, deports them. How can we continue to do that? In America, we don't want to learn your language. We don't want to follow your customs. We follow our own customs. And to me, it looks like they don't want to become Americans.
You know, Gary, your family were illegal immigrants. The American Indians, this was their country.
Yeah.
All of us came here, and we didn't learn their language. We didn't learn their customs. We said, you take ours, and you take it now. So we're all children of illegal immigrants. So I don't know how we can be so choosy about the new ones.
That got to be a little heated in there.
It definitely did. But we've all respected one another and got to hear each other's opinions. And I never thought I would be able to relate to someone that was a Republican. And I have, more than once.
More than once.
Right.
I think it's been interesting to talk to Trump supporters because I don't meet many.
She's like, I don't want to be a part of this.
Seeing all of these people from all of these other walks of life, exactly how my views have changed on it, I'm not so hardcore.
What is your advice about political discourse in this country?
You need to listen, not yell, not scream. You need to talk.
At the end,
And this is how your voice will be heard.
a closing poll to see if there's been any movement on the issues, but already visible.
Like, it's opened my mind to see that I need to listen to other people's views.
Is the recognition that there is unexpected power in bridging the divide.
I have enjoyed this beyond measure.
Sorry, don't know what happened. Let's go back to the slides. Right, so you can see, I mean, that really gives an indication of something, and I'm sure you'll talk about that afterwards. I'm now going to pass over to Julie.
Thank you so much, Kathie. Yeah, so it's just so inspiring to see people coming together, and the potential it has to change the discussion is so profound. So let's review the benefits of citizens' assemblies. Citizens can think long term. They're thinking about themselves, their families, their communities. They're not worrying about their career path in politics or trying to please others to get re-elected. They can break political deadlock, as you saw in the clip on immigration in the US. Citizens, unlike politicians, have nothing to lose and are enabled to make difficult decisions on issues that have confounded politicians for years, like gay marriage and abortion in Ireland, and most certainly on the climate and ecological emergency. It also can show a fair, real representation of society. A process is used, as you saw, to ensure that the assembly reflects key characteristics of the population: gender, age, ethnicity, education, geography. This would engender public support, as people are more likely to accept a radical decision made by their peers rather than politicians and elites. The process is transparent, every aspect of it, how it's organized, materials freely available online, presentations live streamed, and citizens are informed. They gain an in-depth knowledge of the issue. There is consideration and discussion leading to informed decisions rather than just opinion. So this gives the process legitimacy, as the assembly can be seen to have considered all of the issues, including the social impact on the most vulnerable in society, and the power of special interest is limited by a diverse oversight body that ensures the process is fair. So I'd also like to reiterate that citizens' assemblies are not intended to replace the government. They support the government through a democratic process that gives ordinary people a real say in determining what should be done. And lastly, collective intelligence. Studies have shown that the problem-solving capability of a deliberative assembly is not down to the ability of each individual, but is a result of the diversity of the group. There's a diversity of views, of thinking, of reasoning, of insight, of experience. This is a value in and of itself, and it's a diversity that is absent in electoral politics. So why is XR calling for a UK-wide citizens' assembly? A UK-wide citizens' assembly is needed for coordinated, urgent government action. We need everyone in the same room for UK-wide policy changes, and local citizens' assemblies can only make local level policy, and so they're not empowered to implement policy on the national scale that's required. So, in other words, only the UK government has the resources, money, and legislative power to address the far-reaching changes that are needed. So this could include tax and industrial policy, health, social and educational responsibilities, and crucially, international agreements and cooperation, all of which are within the UK government's mandate. This may seem familiar, this model, and you may be aware that the UK has already had a climate assembly. It was commissioned by 6 select committees, not the UK government. It took place fairly recently, over several weekends in Birmingham in early 2020, with the last 2 weekends happening online due to COVID-19. The question they considered was, how can the UK reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050? And upon this question, they came up with the following key recommendations. So they called for better climate information for the public, as well as leadership from governments with cross-party support. They highlighted the need for fairness within the UK, particularly in respect of protecting livelihoods. No reliance on future technologies, that is the removal of greenhouse gases, should focus on known natural methods and not speculative technology. They also urged for an independent body to monitor and report on recommendations progress, and notably a follow-up Citizens' Assembly on issues related to net zero, which their assembly didn't cover. So while there were many valuable lessons learned from this, there were quite a few important limitations. So quite crucially, there was a limited remit due to the 2050 target. It's far too late as far as the science is concerned. And in other words, the evidence presented spoke to the 2050 timeline rather than the urgency of the situation as it stands today. They also failed to look at the UK's global carbon emissions, particularly in respect of import trade and transport. And the wider public was not aware that the Climate Assembly was taking place. There was no, or quite scarce, media coverage, and there was no mechanism for public submissions. So ultimately, the Assembly, it was also only advisory, so it was not set up to make decisions and consequently was quite toothless. So while we do acknowledge that Climate Assembly UK was a stepping stone towards the Citizens' Assembly on Climate and Ecological Justice, this is kind of our ideal model that we would be putting forward and that we need, and that XR is demanding. So given the recommendations from Climate Assembly UK and what the scientists are telling us, the next assembly needs to be far more robust. And having consulted and discussed with many experts in the field of citizens' assemblies, we've come up with some suggestions of what we think it should look like. So it should be run by an independent organization. We expect there would need to be, on top of this, multiple assemblies focusing on different aspects of the climate emergency running concurrently. They would come together for their initial training and then split into groups of 50 to 100 members in each. The recommendations that receive strong support within the assembly, we would say around 80%, would be required to be implemented by the government. And justice needs to be central to all decisions, and therefore we would expect not only climate scientists, but also historians, economists, social justice experts, and rights holders to be invited to speak. We expect the assembly would consist of at least 6 weekends, with all groups running parallel to each other. And the cost of a UK-wide citizens' assembly, well, France's cost was 5.6 million euros. And given that the annual cost of the House of Lords is around £100 million, investing 6 or 7 million in a citizens' assembly is quite easily justified, given the scale of the problem that we face. So here we have a slide on how XR will not design or run the assembly, and this is a very important point to hone in on. We may have a role along with other social stakeholders, ensuring the process is inclusive and transparent, but quite vitally, this process would be independent. It would be free from interference by government, corporations, or anyone else, including Extinction Rebellion. So this is very important, and the public must understand that XR will not impose radical ideas or control the process in any way. There are several experienced organizations in the UK that will be able to run it. Yeah, so how are we going to achieve our aim of a citizens' assembly? Well, XR will continue to lead the way in non-violent protest, civil disobedience, and rebellion in order to achieve our demands. But we are also encouraging people to support the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. And while this is not an XR bill, we're in favour of it, and we need broad cross-society support to pressure MPs. So this bill was written by an alliance of scientists, lawyers, and activists. It provides a clear framework based on scientific reality and the UK's commitments under the 2015 Paris Agreement to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. We urge you please to visit the CE Bill website. They hold many talks explaining more about what it is, key dates, what is needed to get it passed, and so on. But in a nutshell, we'll summarize what will happen if the bill is passed. So this would mean that the UK will make and enact a serious plan on the climate and ecological emergency. So this means sticking to our real fair share of global emissions so that we don't go over critical global temperature rise. Our entire carbon footprint must be taken into account in the UK and overseas, including production of items not made or grown in the UK. So it includes imported goods and transport. It will also mean that we will be protecting and restoring ecosystems and mitigating damage caused by supply chains, as this has direct impact upon our climate and ecosystems. And the plan should not rely on speculative technologies to save the day. This is an excuse to carry on emitting as usual. It will also ensure a citizens' assembly to work alongside the government to find fair and just solutions. And while the recommendations will not be legally binding, the Parliament will have to consider every recommendation. And this is purely because with binding recommendations, this would be very difficult to pass this bill. So the Citizens' Assembly will help the government and Parliament decide on the measures to include in the emergency strategy. So please write your MP and ask them to learn about Citizens' Assemblies, ask them to openly support a Citizens' Assembly on climate and ecological justice, and to sign up to the CEE bill. Our aim is to build support for a UK-wide Citizens' Assembly amongst the public and politicians. So you may also be left asking what else you can do. So we, in any way possible, we need to get the word out to as many people as we can. Kathie, would you mind going on to the next slide, please? So if you like this talk, please do recommend it to others. We run it every fortnight, or we can arrange a special talk for your group as we are doing now. Just let us know. Start conversations with your friends and families if you feel confident to do that. Or if you'd like to learn more about real democracy or even be trained to give the talk, you can do so with the Citizens' Assembly Advocates Network, Conn as it's known, which is running a series of 3 deeper dives into deliberative democracy. And of course, if you'd like to contact us, we're on all the usual platforms, which you can see on the screen now. And please do tag us on Instagram, it really helps us out. So that concludes our talk, and we will now be opening it up for the Q&A.
Wow, thank you very much indeed for a very informative session. So let's do that. Let's open it up and see who would like to make a comment or raise a question. Stick your hand up and I'll call you to join us. Okay, that's Sandra.
Yes, I'm quite involved with the CE bill with the local group of Quakers, and my own MP is signed up to it. I suppose, and part of a Quaker environment and social justice and peace promotion groups, and everything is interlinked, and certainly the present democracy is just so dire. It can't really be called that. But in terms of the actual process of setting up a citizens' assembly, I've read a bit and this has been very helpful, but I suppose one of my concerns is who chooses the experts. I know it's an independent group, but I am sure that lots of different people would have different views on who should be brought in, and getting the right lot is really crucial. And the other thing, for how long does this decision stay valid? Because part of the issue with the present system is that after 5 years you can have a government come in that completely undoes, as we saw it in America, which might be good in some cases or it might be bad. But does it really get around the 5-year thing?
Right. I'll come in there. So who decides who presents? We often get asked that question. So there's a coordinating group or a professional group. It's probably a consortium of groups, deliberative, who will oversee the whole process. And it's commissioned by government, or it could be a local authority. So then there's an advisory board. The coordinating group, I think, often select some of the people to go on the advisory board to assist them, and they're selected by them to include a range of experts in many different areas. But then over that, you have an oversight. Sometimes it's called something else. I can't remember what they called it in Scotland. A steering group. They had a steering group in Scotland. Their Citizens Assembly that just finished this weekend. So the Oversight Panel, and that would be a real mixture of people. It could be representatives from different political parties. There could be somebody from Extinction Rebellion. It could be from a really broad group of people who oversee that the presentations are going to be fair and open. And also the Citizens Assembly itself should be able to invite people that as they go through their learning and they discover things and they think, they also should be in a position to invite people to present. So it's as broad as, we can imagine being able to organise. So there are all these checks and balances through the process. This isn't just one group. In terms of the fight, I mean, if the bill becomes an act, then the Act of Parliament, the 5-year issue wouldn't really be relevant, because once it becomes an act, it's very highly unlikely that in 5 years' time, a different political party would chuck it out. Does that answer your question, Sandra?
No. I meant really that suppose a whole load of citizens at the end of 5 years leapt up and said we need another one.
Well, citizens' assemblies are used to solve contentious issues, and it could be that once the bill has become it would deal with a different question. And you have a different group of people. They don't sit as a permanent body of people. They're just for each different topic, each different question.
I presume, hopefully, if you have a properly representative group, you can really take it forward. And I was interested to hear the referendum link. There's a key decision. You say, right, we've come to a point. Now let's put it out to the referendum. That always applies?
No, it doesn't always apply, and there are definitely downsides, because the problems with referendums is it's all a yes/no. If people don't have learning and understanding, it's a knee-jerk. It's just sort of what response of the moment. It's not an informed thinking. In the case of Ireland, it was because abortion was written into the constitution. In order to change the constitution, they had to have a referendum. And in France, where there was a big climate assembly, the one that cost 5.6 million euros, that was really very robust, and it was set up, it sounded like it was going to be the most exciting ever, because President Macron undertook to implement whatever recommendations the citizens made without filter, he said. It didn't turn out, politicians never stick to their words. Without filter, he undertook to implement them either by bill to Parliament, direct regulation or referendum. In the event, the bill that has been, the climate bill that has just been presented to their parliament is really falls very, very short of the recommendations that the citizens made. So that has been, you know, that's been very disappointing, really.
Okay.
Sabotaged by the usual people afterwards, you know, people, the corporations and the...
Could the next, Judith, I saw you put your hand up right earlier on. Have you a question or? No, you haven't. No, okay, that's fine. Who else would like to go? Okay, Barbara.
So,
Barbara.
Kathie, on that last point, France set it up, and the government, the president said they would fulfil the obligations, but then when it actually came to it, they were scuppered. Okay, it would seem to me that if the government set it up, you'd have a better chance of getting through, but even with that, it doesn't. What I was going to ask you was, if you have an independent organisations setting up a citizens' assembly, what chance is there actually of the government taking notice of that? But from what you've said to me now, even with the government setting up to start with, it still didn't get through.
Well, the thing with the French one, it wasn't the government, it was the president. He was trying to get himself out of a hole. So he didn't really have the full backing of Parliament. But interestingly, I'll just give you in East Belgium, which is the German-speaking area of Belgium, they have set up a permanent citizens' assembly that sits alongside the House of Parliament, their parliament. And the Citizens' Assembly is made up of two randomly selected groups. One that they organise the Citizens' Assemblies and they select the questions. And what happens, I think once a year, all the citizens are invited to send in questions they want. They have to be, you know, it has to be contentious, a problem that needs solving. It needs this sort of collective intelligence to come up with the good proposals. And then they decide themselves, the citizens, this House of Citizens, that bit's called the Citizens' Council. They decide themselves which questions are going to be addressed, and then they're taken to the another citizens' assembly that sits there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the recommendations, it isn't written to the constitution that their recommendations are going to be automatically implemented, but they're presented to Parliament and Parliament has to respond to them within a certain time period. And really, you know, there is pressure because there's public buy-in. You know, the government then, the Parliament then is more under an obligation or a feeling that the people are behind it to try and to make it into law, to enact it.
So the one Citizens' Assembly that has happened in this country, and it did have about a day, about 24 hours of publicity. I didn't know about it, but that was about it. And that was, you said it was 6 different select committees in Parliament who set that up. I mean, that sounded like a pretty good start. You know,
no, because because select committees are only advisory; they're only consultative.
Okay, yeah, true.
So there's no government buy-in to it at all. The government, I mean, it did get debated. One MP tabled a debate in Parliament that they consider the recommendations, but I mean, Boris Johnson didn't consider any of the recommendations. So that was the problem with it, apart from the fact that it was, you know, 2050. So although it made brave attempts at coming up, if you're only presented with information that feeds to that date, you're never going to make any radical decisions.
And it's a very exciting concept and idea, you know, and there is we just don't understand each other, and the people who are making the decisions have got so many agendas, I guess. So be a wonderful thing to see happen. I mean, how do you get a holistic view? Because, you know, some of the questions are so, the budgets are so big, you know, you might be, you know, you think, let's do this, let's spend XD billion in this, but it needs to be paid for with massive taxes on whoever over here or something. And so there's some quite big questions that sort of interfere with what government is. You know, it's one thing saying is 80%, you know, has to be done, but how does that, how balance happen?
Well, first of all, I mean, the recommendations, the presentations have to be impact assessed, so that you're not going to just choose the things that most appeal to you. You're going to choose the things that are going to have the most impact on the climate and ecology, getting us out of this mess, if you like. In France, they had, sitting alongside their assembly, they had a whole team of fact checkers. They also had, I think, some people from I think they might have been government or from civil service, economists who were sort of giving feeding in, if you like, some of the economic implications. But at the end of the day, I mean, you know, there are going to have to be quite strong choices that are going to, radical choices that are going to have to be made. And we're going to have to face up to that at some stage, or not.
Okay, Christopher had a hand up, and then Anne after that.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm involved in a project in Luton, which is about getting young, school children involved in. It's called, the project is under the auspices of an organisation called Peace Child International, and that's related to the United Nations targets, and we're specifically working on getting children involved in climate issues. And I'm just interested whether you can point me in the direction of any resources around setting up a equivalent assembly for youngsters to get involved and to experience the kind of things we're talking about, to prepare them for later when perhaps they can join a real citizens assembly.
Yeah.
Oh, you've gone on mute again, Christopher. Oh.
Yeah, sorry, I finished.
Thank you, Christopher. If I can have your email, I can certainly try and send you some resources afterwards. There was something I heard about today that, or no, it was yesterday. It was called Kitchen. It's not at a citizens' assembly level, but it's because although it needs to be. We really need the top down. We also need the bottom up, and we need to be incorporating this way of deep listening and talking to each other in life. And there was one I saw. Can I minimize you here a minute? I'll see if I can just bring it up on my. It was lovely. Oh, where did I have it? It's called Kitchen Table Conversations. I can't find the information here at the moment. Just a minute, I'll see if I can. No, is it here? You know, all these different places you keep things. I was just going to see if I could find it for you, because it was just so delightful, but I can't. So I'll leave that.
Okay.
But I can send you some information.
Kathie, send it to Staffan, and he can send it round.
Right,
yeah.
that's a good idea.
I'll send it to everyone who came along. Okay, Anne, and then after it'll be Andrew.
Right. Actually, I was actually fiddling with my hair. I wasn't putting my hand up.
Apologies.
I just thought,
but I'm happy to join in.
Quick question, very, very general, just out of curiosity. Are there any successful already XR in other countries that have got there with the Citizens' Assembly? Because, you know, I'm just thinking about it's a worldwide problem. And
no, there are moves that, you know, different countries. I mean, France has had one, a climate one. There are definitely a call for it. There is, but you know, each country is quite different
Yes.
Like the legal system and how they would present it. But I mean, we're calling for it, but you know, we're not going to be the ones, you know, people sort of say, oh, XR running it, but we're not going to run a citizens assembly. Although there is a move to have, it won't be authorized by or commissioned by any authority, but there is a move to have some sort of global event going on, a deliberative event, I think around the time of COP26, I think. But yes, it's called a global assembly, but it needs to be really commissioned. You know, we don't have a global authority. The UN isn't a global power authority to implement things. So it's difficult to talk about global.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm looking at the time now and aware that our witching hour is coming up. So we have Andrew and I think Anne, and then we're going to we'll close off, let people go, and let the discussion drift on for people who want to stay. So Andrew.
Yes, I just wanted to make a couple of observations. Really, I mean that was fascinating. The first observation is that.
Oh, you've gone on mute again.
Okay,
that's better.
Back again. Sorry, you're asking governments to abrogate an awful lot of power. If you're asking them to take action on what citizens' assemblies say, and of course, governments are pretty much founded on the principle that they have power because they have been elected. Now, you and I know the reality of that, and I suspect they do too, but they aren't actually going to admit that. So it does concern me a little that it's only in situations where they are desperate to shift the responsibility of decision making onto somebody else that they're ever likely to actually have a sign up for climate change, for anything that comes out of a climate change assembly. Of course, actually, the climate change is such a big issue that it may be that they do want to do that. So, you know, I can see that it's a possibility, but it does kind of slightly concern me. However, saying that, I mean, what I was very impressed by from the video and feel strongly about climate assemblies anyway, citizens assemblies, is that it gets people talking to one another who don't necessarily share the same opinions. And that's part of the problem, I think, a political problem that we are in at the moment. It's to do with the kind of ghettoization that comes about through social media, that at the end of the day, you are talking to people who only talk to people like you. I mean, even I suspect this group, you know, we probably are all pretty much talking to people who are like us, and all the people who aren't like us aren't here. So the Citizen Assembly does actually force people to have that kind of conversation, and all power to its elbow. I mean, we ought to have a lot more of them, and that includes kind of local ones, whether or not they've got kind of power in terms of executive power of any kind, but just simply to get back to a sense of having a shared purpose, and not a shared purpose in the sense of one agreed way forward, but a shared purpose in the sense of we are part of something together, and we have to compromise and live together.
Kathie and Julie, can you comment on that? You want to bring in?
Well, it's time. Democracy is the people, and what's happening with our elected politicians. I mean, it's not ticking a box is not democracy, and they're all pretty much similar thinking people, and you have the same sort of minds thinking about a problem, solving a problem. They don't have the magnitude that you get when you have the collective intelligence. I mean, in that video, that, you know, really there was one woman, what she said, I mean, even I wouldn't have thought, I mean, it was really opened up people's thinking. I mean, you could see them, you know, I mean, it's very, and that is something that you get, and you know, you don't have this win-lose, you know, you see what's happening in the House of Parliament. I mean, it's just arguing and losing, and we have to move away from that model, and you know, citizens should be involved in decisions to do with the lives that we all live.
Yeah. Anne, did you have a last comment or question you wanted to put into this?
Well, my sense is that the future for young people is going to be very different, and they're going to press their case forward. And I thought the latest edition of Green Christian, the magazine, which focused on young people, was very helpful, and there were some really good articles in that. I personally support something called the Villas Park Educational Trust, which goes amongst disadvantaged people, very bright disadvantaged people, and brings them on as future leaders. And I've just paid for a kind of citizens advice, citizens assembly to happen in April, and I paid for the curriculum on climate change linked to the nature crisis, and it's going to happen in April. And they're terribly excited that they're able to run that, and I fed them the stuff from Green Christian. I think there's a movement there. I do, and it may be only early start for young people to be getting up and running and getting a GCSE in climate science, etc., but it's happening. That's my point.
Thank you very much. Kathie, Julie, any last word?
I see Andrew's got his hand up. Is that you?
Well, I think what we'll do, Andrew's mentioned, we'll if anyone, we'll continue. We'll let people go in a moment and let the conversation go on. First of all, on behalf of Green Christian, we really want to thank you for taking us through this. My understanding has gone up hugely, so we really do appreciate the time you've put into this. Thank you, Kathie and Julie.